So this afternoon, we're meeting with Ames Sheldon, a historian and a novelist. And we're going to talk a little bit about her background and um, her writing. So Ames, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
You bet. I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was 9 after reading the book Stuart Little, which I just loved, by E.B. White. And I decided, okay, I want to be a writer too. So I've been writing ever since. Short stories in, grade school, high school, college. When I was about to turn 30, I thought, if I ever want to write a novel, I better start. So I did. I started work on a novel that was called Moby Jane at the time. It was inspired by a relative of mine, and I'll say more about that later. I spent 14 years trying to get the book published, sent it out to editors, got comments back, did more work on it, sent it out again. The first time I sent it out, it went to the feminist press and they turned it down. And 14 years later, I sent it to Seal Press in, I think, Washington State. And they said they really liked it, but they only publish murder mysteries. I should send it to the feminist press. At which point I decided, okay, this isn't working. I put it away. Several years later, maybe, well, I worked on various grant-funded projects as a writer, editor, and then I became a fundraiser. I actually worked in the Bay Area for a couple of years at the Sierra Club, writing thank you letters, which was fun, and moved into fundraising development from there. So I wrote annual fund letters for one organization after another. I sequentially I had one organization I worked for at a time, and wrote grant proposals, became a major gifts officer. A couple of my most favorite places to work besides the Sierra Club was the Minnesota Historical Society, and then after that the Minneapolis Public Library. So it really fit in well with the things that I care about.
It sounds like it.
I love,
And it's interesting that you did writing of any sort once you decided you wanted to become a writer, and you used it whatever way it would work.
exactly. I mean, I did need to make a living, and I never made a living selling fiction. So, but in a way, grant proposals have a certain fictional element because you're talking about something that hasn't necessarily happened yet, but there really needs to.
Right.
Anyway, it's a sales document too, is another way of looking at it. So I really enjoyed working in development, but I also was tickled to be able to retire eventually and really hone in on my 3 historical novels.
Very good. Before we get into those novels, can you tell me a little bit about your background in history? I know your undergraduate degree was in history, and then how did that influence your writing of these historical novels?
Well, actually, my undergraduate degree was in English.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
I went to Bryn Mawr College. And then later I was working at the University of Minnesota, and I got a master's degree there in American Studies / Women's Studies. And I did that while I was working at the University of Minnesota on a grant-funded project to write and edit and index. I was hired to write, edit, and index a huge reference book, Women's History Sources, a guide to archives and manuscript collections in the United States. This was published by R.R. Bowker in the late 1970s. So it was at the beginning of the field of women's history. And it was just a wonderful project. And that's how I learned to love history, and especially women's history.
Very good. And then, so the novel that I read is this one.
Yes.
This is your third one, but
Yep.
third one to be published, but not third one that you wrote, correct? I mean, or how should I write? First one to write, the third to be published?
Yeah, exactly. So yes, so with Lemons in the Garden of Love, after putting it away in a drawer in the early 1980s, then I was writing grant proposals and working. I was a single mom. And then I decided I wanted to write a new novel. So I ended up using the Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, for about a year to exercises to sort of get my creativity flowing again. And then I was on a walk up in northern Minnesota one day when this idea just sort of popped out of the sky about what turned into my first and second novels. And it was such so much fun. The first novel, or the idea, let me put it that way, the idea was based on my uncle, who was deceased at the time, who had written an operetta for his 50th anniversary, his 50th celebration of being at Andover, being a student at Andover during World War II. And so the songs were just so compelling to me, the words and the music, about being a musical boy who didn't fit in, who wasn't a scholar, who wasn't a ladies' man, trying to find his way at boarding school at Andover during World War II. So I wrote a book about him, and I showed it to an editor who said, this is a really nice book, an interesting book. It could be published as a young adult novel, but in fact, he knew I meant it to be an adult novel. He said, the people are too nice. Not enough happens. There's not enough plot. So I went into a writer's group with this editor and a bunch of other novelists and rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it. And to increase the
Tension.
Yes. I made his mother an ambulance driver in France during World War I, who married a French surgeon who died on the front. And then the story jumps ahead to World War II. And on the home front, turns out that her children have no idea she had been in that war, that she'd been married before. There are all these secrets that are simmering under the surface, which start to come out when their son enlists to fight in World War II, the son of her second marriage. So that was Eleanor's Wars.
Okay, very good. Now
then,
you make me want to read that one. I'm going to have to get that one next.
Good. It's really quite wonderful, especially Nat, the boy. I don't know. I'm very attached to him. And then the second novel is the sequel. It's called Don't Put the Boats Away, and that's about the family after World War II, right afterwards, and with a focus on the daughter who goes to graduate school in chemistry and becomes a chemist, and the son, Nat, who becomes a heart surgeon. And that covers about 20 years of the family's life and their children and their parents and so on and so forth. So once I had finished those two novels, then what happened was President Trump was elected. And at that point, I realized what I could do about that was to pull out my first novel and rework it big time. I mean, really work it hard. And that's the book that is Lemons in the Garden of Love.
Love, yes. And I loved this book, and I feel like your timing was perfect on that, particularly with the Supreme Court decision. And because it's a novel, it's a lovely way, particularly for young people, to get the historical past of suffrage and um, the what do I want to say? Family planning, birth control issues early on, which would have been the time of both of my grandmothers, would have been living through that and were quite involved. So it really hits home in that regard and what's at stake with the decision. So I wish you much success with it, because it's just wonderful. I mean, and I know that there's some background on this one, like your earlier two novels. There's a tie-in with your family. So can you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So the inspiration for Lemons in the Garden of Love was my great grand aunt, Blanche Ames. So the family that the line that I'm in is from her maiden name, Blanche Ames. My grandmother's aunt was Edith Ames. So they were sisters. Blanche, I learned about Blanche while I was working on the Women's History Sources Survey. And I was just amazed. I'd never heard of her before. And to find out that she was the president and one of the co-founders of the Birth Control League of Massachusetts just blew me away. Then it turns out that, I mean, she's even more interesting than that. But I mean, she was an inventor, she was an artist, she was a architect, et cetera. And she had 4 children, and she was married to a very interesting man, a botanist, also an Ames, but from a different branch of Ames's. So that was the inspiration for Lemons in the Garden of Love.
And a wonderful inspiration it was. And so when you're talking about these 3 novels, I'm seeing that you're drawing off some family stories on all of them. And I just finished reading a couple of different books on that, about how our past informs our present. And anyway, I just love that you're drawing off of that. At this point, I think I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our connection, because I discovered, so I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see. This is where we connect. And I think I may have sent this to you, but for our audience. So the person we have in common is this Isaac Sheldon, born in 1731. And he is your 4th great grandfather and my 5th great grandfather, or what do I put, mother? That should be great grandfather as well. Anyway, and so we are 5th cousins. Actually, this is the 5th cousins once removed here. So Justice Sheldon is my ancestor, and Nehemiah is yours. And what's interesting is that they, as the children of Isaac Sheldon and Sarah Gifford, that union had 15 children. And wow. Nehemiah was the 14th child. And Justice was much earlier on. I'll finish that. And I wanted to show you, I found, here is a picture of Nehemiah for you. So this is your ancestor.
I don't see that.
Oh, you can't see it? Let me stop it and let me go in again, because sometimes it does that. Let's see. There we go. There he is.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I found that when I was digging around in the tree. So I'm just telling you these things about all of their children and a little bit of background, because who knows, maybe you'll be inspired to tell a Sheldon story one of these days, um, along
Well,
that line.
it turns out that in Eleanor's Wars, I was inspired by Faye Sheldon, my grandmother Sheldon, whose first husband died of the Spanish flu right after, on their basically during their honeymoon. Um,
Oh my God.
and so that was, as I say, the inspiration, a part of the inspiration for Eleanor's Wars. But anyway,
Yeah, how wonderful. I mean, you could either, just make up everything, or you can actually draw off what you know about your family, which I think is a good point to inspire genealogists to tell more stories about their family. I'm trying to do that. I wrote a piece quite a while ago on my blog, which is turning trees into stories, because really the names, dates, and places on a tree are pretty meaningless to people unless you can put it into context and flesh out what was going on. And
yes.
and when you mentioned the Spanish flu, my great grandmother, in her diary, which I think I sent you, I posted it as blog posts, and she talks about the Spanish flu in San Francisco, where she was living at the time. So
Oh, I didn't see that somehow.
yeah, yeah, and her I titled hers a soprano's aria, because she was a soprano, and music is what got her through some of the most difficult parts of her life. So there's 36, now there's 37 chapters that are just excerpts in chronological order from her diary that I illustrated. So I'm sharing that because our listeners and viewers may get inspired to do something about their families, because it's wonderful to collect the names and dates, but it's so much better to put the stories in, and to find out all the information that you can on particular individuals. And there isn't, I mean, some people have a lot more about them than others, but there's something you can discover about almost everybody, even if it's just the littlest tidbit. So anyway, do you have another novel in the works, or are you thinking of anything?
Not right now. No, I'm still busy trying to talk to people about these 3. So no, I'm not thinking about another novel right now. Maybe at some point down the road, but right now I'm busy marketing. My books were published by the first one was Beaver's Pond Press, and the second 2 were She Writes Press, where basically they are the hybrid presses where you pay to be published, but they do go through a critique. They don't publish everything that you send to them, but then you do all the marketing yourself. Uh,
Right.
so that's what I'm busy doing these
Yeah,
days.
and that's the tough part, because there's just so much out there, and there's never enough. I mean, I read all the time, and there's never enough time to read everything that I would like to read.
I
Um,
agree.
anyway,
But I'd love to see a Sopranos aria, to see those poems.
oh yeah, well, I'll make sure I send you the link again, because it's well, the first chapter, the intro, I actually took an excerpt from one of the more interesting parts of the diary, sort of to get people to find that this might be interesting. A lot of it's very mundane, um, but even the mundanity really gives you a feel for what life was like, what her life was like, what she had to go through.
Mhm.
And in her particular case, she was married to a rather unsavory character.
Oh,
Um, So my my great grandfather.
A Sheldon? And
No, not a Sheldon. No,
okay.
it wasn't a
Phew.
Sheldon. So no, the Sheldon side, they seem to do pretty well for themselves and didn't seem to be too bad. In fact, one of my Sheldons was involved in the Underground Railroad in Michigan.
Oh, wow.
So
Wonderful.
yeah, that was kind of interesting. And I wasn't sure, but I actually connected with a author of a book in Jackson County, Michigan, and it looked like it was true. So that was good. Yeah, but
Wonderful.
I mean, some of your family stories turn out to be true, and some of them turn out to be fiction. But you can't
True.
really know for sure unless you explore them. So anyway.
Mhm. That's
Is there
absolutely right.
anything else you'd like to tell people, budding authors or Sheldons?
Well, yeah, a couple things. I think it is great to use family history as a jumping off point for writing, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. I mean, in my case, it's been fiction, but it's been wonderful to be inspired by these characters that grip me and that I get to know so much more about. So I think it's really a wonderful way to just understand your past, learn more about your past. Um, Another thing I'd like to say about my most recent book, Lemons in the Garden of Love, besides being so timely in terms of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, um, Justice Thomas threatened to reconsider contraception as well. It took 100 years to get birth control legalized. And I think many, especially younger women, don't know that story, don't know that it took that long, what was involved, and to potentially lose that right as well. I mean, it's just terrifying. So I hope everyone will read read this book and
I
explore it.
agree. I went to my library and said, you don't have a copy in your system, you need to get it. And
Thank you.
they ordered it because I really think it's incredibly well timed. And the fact that you had written it so long ago and then decided when you did, I mean, it just kind of gives you chills. It's sort of like when you get an inspiration about somebody in the past. I don't know. I sometimes feel as if there's some sort of conduit between the other world and this one, and the inspiration comes from the ancestors. I don't know how to explain it any other way. I know that sounds ridiculous, but
I agree with you. In the case of Blanche, she ended up coming to me in a dream and telling me to write her story. Well, what? Where did that come from? Okay, I will. I did.
I don't understand it either. But I mean, I wrote a piece about her name is Catherine Stewart Mosier, and she's my second great grandmother, I think. And when I wrote that piece, I had no idea that a woman could go through so much loss and tragedy in one life. As I compiled everything that happened to her,
Mm,
I just could not believe it. And in a way, though, knowing that you have people like that in your past and what they've gone through is sort of an inspiration for anything that we have to deal with. Like, if they can do it, we can do it. These are
yes,
strong women that preceded us.
exactly, exactly.
And so I think that that's important for all of us to know not just where we are in this little bit in time, but where we stand in the whole confluence of all the individuals that were necessary, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to make it possible for us to be here.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you.
Anyway,
Absolutely, Kelly. Thank you.
thank you so much for joining us, Ames, and I wish you much success with your book.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
It's been great getting to know you.
It's been great talking to you.